The problems facing New Zealand's primary sector have been mounting at a rapid pace. So I think it's time for open hearts and open minds. Welcome to Sarah's Country, your place to tune in for in-depth issues and inspiring innovation, and how Aotearoa New Zealand strives to be the very best producer of food and fibre in the world. Through, of course, kaitiakitanga, the meaning of guardianship of the land, and he tangata, its people. I'm your host, Sarah Perium, and the privilege is all mine to be given a life to serve those who are curious about what they consume and connect them with the most passionate stewards of our land and our industry. Produced in alliance with the great innovative team at Global HQ, they are home to Farmers Weekly, of course, Dairy Farmer, Agri-HQ, On Farm Story, and Ag and Ed, passionate stewards of information transfer to farmers and growers in this country. For those of you who are new to watching live or are listening on podcast, kia ora and welcome. You're in for a treat of news and views, and we would love, of course, your participation live in the comments below wherever you are watching across 15 different channels simultaneously. Or if you are listening on demand, feel free to send me an email at any time, sarah@periummedia.com. Now, why don't we start with an easy way to warm up the comment boxes, something I haven't done, Joel, for a while. I love knowing who's tuned in and listening to us. Where in New Zealand are you watching us tonight? And if it is your first time, can you let us know? I'd love to know about some newbies. But if you're a regular, please let us know that as well. It's always very lovely to know we have regular viewers each night, Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday from 7 o'clock. Now, the world's bursting global population can be much to blame for the burning of fossil fuels, pushing our natural resources to its limits, and ultimately the warming of the Earth's atmosphere. But I believe that humans can deliver incredible innovation that can improve the well-being of others nutritionally as well as the planet if provided the ability to do so. I think that we've structured society to be accountable for why and how we go about our business, that it has stifled innovation and made the human life a life of ticking boxes for survival. I'm very against centralisation. It rips the creativity to provide solutions based on the requirements of that community and that topography. I was fortunate to grow up in a generation of board games, card games. It got me thinking, we teach our kids through these ways the ability to be both creative and logical about how they choose to ultimately win that game. And of course, we have some great guests joining us to talk more about that more localized approach and creative thinking. And it also was spurred on by a story that I have seen someone has paid 10 grand to play Monopoly with Finance Minister Grant Robertson and National Party Finance spokesperson Paul Goldsmith. Could you imagine the different logic to winning the game between these three players? I'd love to hear from you throughout tonight. What a fun thing to discuss. Your favourite board games or card games. We played a group of friends of mine one weekend back at my house, Kiwis Against Morality. Joel, can I tell you, probably to no surprise, with my twisted sense of humour, that I won?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Have you played it yet, Joel? I mean, I know you'd learn a lot about Kiwi culture through playing there. I think we'll have to play it one day at my house. I can't see you.
No, you can't see me. No, I've played Cards Against Humanity, but I've never played Kiwis Against Humanity. I'll have to give that one a go.
Against morality.
Morality, okay.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. Now, Joel, on that, while the camera's on you, what is your favourite board game? I know that yourself and your partner Sarah enjoy turning off the tally and having some intimate time together.
Yeah. Phrasing. No, we enjoy Settlers of Catan. I think I've said that on the show a few times before, but yeah, no, Settlers of Catan is my go-to, I'd say. Yeah.
Is it kind of like Dungeons and Dragons?
No, this one's more like, it's kind of like Monopoly, just a wee bit more complicated, bit more to it, but also it's not a very complicated game at all. So it's a good fun game to play with your family as well.
How much do you believe goes into the ability to have a poker face in games as opposed to the logic behind how they play the games, though? You were sharing with me about your younger sister. I actually do this. This is why I can relate. Her name's also Sarah, so it must be a Sarah thing where you sort of play the, batter the eyelids and don't look over here kind of card.
Yeah, especially when she was younger. She could just, Monopoly was savage because she'd just sit there the whole time and be playing I don't know what's happening, I don't know what's going on, and then all of a sudden she owns all of your properties and you're broke.
Oh, like a good woman. Imagine her playing with Grant Robertson and Paul Goldsmith.
They wouldn't stand a chance.
Turning now to the stories that we have to share with you tonight. After 7:20, will the arable sector choose to stand up and shine or remain under the radar and let the larger primary sectors dictate New Zealand's agri-economic development? CEO for Foundation for Arable Research doesn't think so, and Alison Stewart is going to join us to explain their vision. Now, funding for maternity wards has been pulled from rural areas in the past 3 years. After 7:30, CEO for New Zealand College of Midwives, Alison Eddy, will discuss their wish list for the election for rural maternal care. Then to close the show, Overseer and Toitū Envirocare announced carbon certification that enables farmers to make carbon neutral or negative claims and future-proof their farms to meet market demand and get ahead of regulation. CEO for Overseer Caroline Reid will join us to close the show. A very interesting development on that. And I'd like to talk to Caroline a lot more about how Overseer will be used in these freshwater farm environment plans. First up on the show, though, South Otago farmer Rick Cameron is going to join us to share his views from what was in this week's Farmers Weekly's Pulpit on regenerative agriculture. This is Sarah's Country. Well, our next guest believes all science is anecdotal of a past point in time. Yet living agriculture is about decision-making on what future markets will want. Joining us now is South Otago farmer Rick Cameron and Director of AgWall. Good evening, Rick. Thank you for taking the time to join us.
I'm humbled by that invitation. Thank you, Sarah.
Oh, you're very sweet. Now, Rick, we are talking to you because of your extensive Pulpit opinion piece in this week's Farmers Weekly with regards to your thoughts around regenerative agriculture, which is obviously filling up a lot of pulpits in recent times in Farmers Weekly. Rick, before we get into your opinion and thoughts around this, could you give our audience a bit of your farming history background?
Okay, yes, well, our family are from the high country, and both my parents were teenage head shepherds on their parents' farms. One was in the Lindis and the other at Otamatara. So shepherding's been in the blood, and it's quite often the thing that goes with the Lord's Prayer when at funerals as well. So it's about more than animals; it's about the people and our connection with the land. So that's basically my background. I've been farming since I was since 1973. We started with less than 20% equity and 4 professionals telling us it couldn't be done, and so we developed from virgin ground. And for the last 45 years, we've been running an all-grass system without any winter cropping.
Tell us about the particular farm that you're on in terms of the climatic challenges, as well as what type of intensity and what type of animals you're running breed-wise as well.
Okay, we're 100% sheep. We have run up to 400 cattle, and we have grown 100 acres of wheat, which we stopped back in the 70s. So we've been all sheep ever since, which is very exacting. And our farm has got 15% flat and 45% of it steep, and it faces the southeast aspect. And with that kind of rolling country, it became imperative how you fenced relative to get the dung placement.
And of course, so let's start to unpack your pulpit here, that you're taking a poke at the science community with regards to their insultingness and interference with regards to agricultural conclusions being misguided, and attacking funding of regenerative agriculture as a misdirection of government funding. You know, what brought you to the point to put pen to paper on this issue?
Well, nobody knows what regenerative means, and a lot of it's about educating, and it gets very complicated, overcomplicated, because it's actually an increased awareness of what nature's powers can do and how much our management interferes with them, either by disturbing the soil or putting the fences up. Most of the agriculture that we've been learned, and we've been a field day guru for all our farming career, and it's based on plots. It doesn't have an animal impact. This difference from the animal impact that we're learning from the high density, short interval grazing is quite eye-opening, and the changes it can have to things like kinetic energy. Now, kinetic energy is something that people find really hard to measure, and it hasn't even entered the spectrum. The other thing today is that we've got so many tools available we can have at home. So, for example, that spectrometer I use, my penetrometers, I've got open probes that I use all around the farm, and I literally use them on all kinds of aspects and all times of the year. And because it's living, it's totally chaotic. And so therefore you're making decisions with 80% of the facts.
Yeah.
And so it's about dealing with change, Sarah. Nobody wants to deal with change. Nobody loves it. I feel like an apprentice. It's like starting again with these little points. So that's why we trial in small areas. And
I suppose it leaves the creativity in farming. Rick, that's the thing, and with regards to your point around science as anecdotal past point in time, and the science community are trained in a way to try and measure what they can measure. How do you believe that we will be able to reach a consensus around one thing that is being described as a mindset and attitude in a framework of an industry that is based on measurable output and input?
Well, we can only work with the willing, and what I'm doing is, or what we're doing is listening to the market. We look after the nation's land. We might have title to it, but our civilization depends on the future of that land. And we've been depleting some things. And the person who quoted that was a Dr. Alan Williams, who's a what's he call himself, a recovering academic. He used to lecture and masters in science, and so they recognize the shortcomings of the lineal approach as against the holistic approach.
What is your answer or view or opinion to those who say we are already regenerative in New Zealand farming?
Yes, I think all of that's arguable, because what you find is that we humans will die for a belief, but we'll run away from a fact. Now, regenerative the real description of regenerative is actually when the birds arrive. You can have all kinds of improvement, but nature actually throws in. And they call Mother Nature because, well, as you know, girls are smarter than us boys. And so we have to learn. So that's the ultimate test.
I will pass no comment on that last view. But I mean, Rick, in all your years of farming, you speak a bit in the pulpit around years and years of being, how the industry has sort of prescribed the way that we should manage land in this country. How far have we come, or not far enough?
I'm in no position to judge others. Everybody has a topographical bias to where the piece of land that they live on, and they have to make that. They're accountable. They only get paid once a year on their performance. A lot of the people who are telling us what to do are paid by the time, not necessarily by the results. There's a significant difference. So we're actually risking our capital. It makes a big difference to those outcomes. And you have to realize you're wrong most of the time. And so you assume that. So that's why at this last 12 months, I've been a regenerative grazing trial. And I suggest we only have very small trials. That's the one thing all the farming career we've been trialing for over 25 years of measuring differences with comparisons. Have your trials very small. For example, if you want to learn another form of grazing and you're doing sheep, I'd suggest you only do it with 15% of your farm and with your singles only. It is very, very subtle.
It's interesting, you've only got 40 summers sometimes as a farmer, and every single 40 summers counts, doesn't it, Rick? And like you said, what a wonderful way of, rather than chopping and changing so dramatically. When you were just saying there before, we also have been rewarded based on output production per kilo for generations. But when we start to move to selling on story for premium, how do you believe that this regenerative mindset and story becomes so much greater in that return on capital?
Ultimately, the market will decide, and that what we believe, what I think the difference is transparency. Every time you lay down a rule, there's an exception, and then your rules get tighter and tighter. I have a spectrometer, and I go through and measure different people's foods in the supermarkets, comparing organic with standard and with biodynamics, and I get completely different answers to what the story says. In my job, I use numbers to make words more factual, more manageable. And from those numbers, because to me, freedom comes from the drudgery of those numbers. And I'm only farming for fun and freedom. That's what it's about. So I've got to enjoy what I'm doing. I'm hoping the market enjoys. So I really ask you, what's the difference between a $10 bottle of wine and a $100 bottle of wine?
A story.
And that will be taste. It'll also be taste. Now, taste is made up of a lot of things, quite often below the surface, and how that's all put together. And a lot of it comes to the point of being even spiritual. So spirituality is not just confined to certain groups of people. You've got to connect with your land that you grow on.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for taking the time. You can read Rick's Pulpit, which has a great title in this week's Farmers Weekly, which is Not All Old Men Are Grumpy. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Rick Cameron is joining us there from his South Otago farm. And of course, Pulpit and Farmers Weekly. If you have any opinions really strong that you want to put pen to paper, make sure you send them in to Brian Gibson, the editor at Farmers Weekly. Now, coming up after the break in Serious Country, we're going to be speaking to Alison Stewart from FAR. Interesting point that Rick brought there around the difference in product. The other day, I bought organic flour for the only reason that I couldn't guarantee what the rest were, and I nearly paid double for it and was happy to do so. There was no rhyme or reason to my consumer decision apart from it was rolled oats, my apologies, not flour, and I knew Harroway's was New Zealand, so I put those two things together and that was as simple as it comes. So therefore, how are we able to take the regenerative agricultural mindset and attitude and way that we farm in New Zealand and wrap an ability for people to consume directly on that fact? I'll be putting that to Alison Stewart, CEO for Foundation for Arable Research, as well as, of course, how she believes it's time for arable to stand up and shine. And for far too long, the industry has been quiet and not at the table on these major political decisions. One I want to put to her is fresh water, where arable have been exempt from this nitrogen cap. Lots to discuss, all that after the break in Serious Country.
This is Serious Country. The recipe for perfect beef and lamb. Take one small fresh country. Make sure it's nice and remote. Now, keep it at the ideal temperature all year round. Next, mix in the farmers. They go perfectly with the nature of this unique place. Add regular sprinkles of rain to really bring out the lush meadow grass. Then let your animals happily graze on this grass all day, every day. And there you have it, New Zealand, the perfect recipe for beef and lamb. Taste pure nature.
Well, the next 5 years will be crunch time for the arable sector that can choose to stand up and shine or remain under the radar and let the larger primary sectors direct New Zealand's agri-economic development. Joining us now in studio to discuss is Foundation for Arable Research Chief Executive Alison Stewart. Welcome to Sarah's Country tonight, Alison. Now, in this article here in Farmers Weekly, you're describing that the arable sector has been seen as an invisible partner for some time. Why do you believe that has been?
I think that actually the arable sector has chosen to be the invisible partner. For many years, it's worked well for the arable sector. They've just got on with their knitting, doing what they do best, and not really wanted to get involved in any of the political sort of toing and froing that some of the other sectors have got involved in. And I think they decided that the profile didn't warrant perhaps the stress of being under the headlights. And so I think it was a concerted choice that, you just do your business, get on with growing your crops, look after the family, and life will look after you. And of course, that's not necessarily the strategy that's going to work in the future.
And for those who know Alison Stewart, certainly staying quiet on these issues is certainly something that it would be difficult in leading forward the members of FAR, Foundation for Arable Research. Do you believe that Arable is stepping into this the game because of the debate around plant versus meat? Is this a reason to step into this the fold?
I don't think it's specifically plant versus meat because, as you know, I just sort of think that's a distraction for New Zealand, and I think we should embrace both. And so I would never present plant options as an alternative to meat. I think that we should be able to have both opportunities. I think it's more the fact that the environment in New Zealand for the farming sector is changed. It's a lot more demanding, and the public have much greater expectations around how we farm. And I think that the arable sector has to be round the table when those discussions about how we move forward with farming in New Zealand happens, because I wouldn't like to see perverse policies being developed that suit the horticulture sector or the livestock sector and end up being quite disadvantageous to the arable sector. So I just think it's the time where arable has to just be round the table, present itself as a valuable land use option for New Zealand, and accept that you might get challenged on some of the things that we do, but we actually have a really good story to tell. And since I've been the CEO, I've just been amazed at the caliber of the growers and the sophistication of the farming systems. And I just sort of think, gosh, most of New Zealand just doesn't even really know what arable is. They don't really know what cropping farmers do and how we contribute to both the domestic market, but also as a crucial underpinning support service to the livestock sector that obviously delivers a huge export value to the country. So, as you say, I don't like sitting back and being quiet, and I'm getting more and more provocative in my old age. And so I just sort of feel as if that this is the time when the arable sector needs to stand up and be counted.
And you're saying being at that table and being a big part of the livestock sector with animal feed, we've seen that where you stepped up to the plate with the drought conditions, and particularly in the North Island, and supporting that against our milling wheat as well. But when it comes to those provocative issues such as freshwater and the nitrogen cap, etc., arable have been sort of left out of that conversation or been given dispensation. Yeah. How do you be seen as collaborating with the livestock sector in scenarios like that from a political perspective?
I mean, it's always nice if you get a get out of jail card, you know, and the politicians say, well, we're going to impose this target on the livestock sector, but not you. But the reality is that we still have to address the issues. You know, we know that there are improvements that we can make in the arable sector. You know, we can use our water more effectively. We can be more efficient in our nutrient management. We can reduce the amount of pesticides that we put on our crops. And these are all things that I believe that we should do, irrespective of whether there's a target or there's a rule or there's a regulation, because it actually, I suppose, positions the arable sector as a really valuable option to create that more resilient, sustainable sort of mixed farming system that I believe is what is the future for New Zealand.
And on that mixed farming system, because a lot of sheep and beef properties claim that we are already regenerative, it is the cropping farmers that internationally have created the soil destruction and monocropping. How can New Zealand's arable image and this regenerative mindset work collaboratively together in what you're saying as multi-land use?
And I guess this is why it's really hard for FAR to sort of get in behind, the regenerative concept, because it is a concept that's come from overseas, like the Midwest of the US, where those large monocultures of soya and cotton and corn have degraded the land. But of course, that's not what arable grain growing in New Zealand is like. We're incredibly diverse. We have more sort of species in our crop rotations. We have more diversity in our farming systems than probably any other country in the world. And so we have to be really proactive and making sure that people understand that the negative scenarios presented overseas are not a reflection of arable cropping in New Zealand. And if you actually took the best arable sort of farming enterprise and compared it with the very best regenerative agriculture enterprise, there probably would be no difference between the two.
In environmental impact.
Yeah.
Yeah. And a fantastic opportunity to get in the forefront of mainstream consumers' mindset with this ambitious goal of 100% milling wheat by 2025. It is an ambitious goal, absolutely, but something that, if you don't shoot for the stars, you won't get the moon. So how do we collectively do that with the demand for animal feed in New Zealand as well?
Well, it's a combination of both. I mean, we don't want to in any way undermine our ability to support the animal sector, but we do want to open up an opportunity to increase the amount of milling wheat that goes into, the bread and the baked produce that New Zealand consumers, I believe, really strongly want. We know,
especially under lockdown.
Well, exactly, because the first thing that went off the shelf was bread. And most New Zealanders would probably think that that was bread that had been produced from New Zealand grain. And of course, it wasn't. A lot of it was stuff that had come in from overseas. So we just want to grow arable cropping in New Zealand, for the benefit of the New Zealand consumer, but also for the benefit of the livestock sector, so that they can portray a truly sort of homegrown story. I think if you're bringing in imported feed to feed livestock as opposed to New Zealand feed, I don't think that story is as compelling to an export market.
Especially with the demands in banning PKE, palm kernel, as well. And lastly, there's a huge demand, especially here in Canterbury, for mixed species crops such as quinoa, chickpeas, these new superstar health foods, and in New Zealand riding the nutritious health wave that globally consumers are demanding. Yet processing seems to continuously be an issue with all the different requirements. How's FAR sort of working on supporting these types of innovations, both from a processing perspective, but also farmers being understand the economics behind it?
Well, and that latter point you make is the crucial point. If you can't make money out of a new crop species, then you're never going to get investment into processing or manufacturing. So it's like any business, growing the crop is one thing, but it has to be a profitable enterprise to attract investors that will then, sort of put the infrastructure in place to either manufacture or process. And I think that we sometimes think that as long as you can grow the crop, then that's it, you'll be successful. But the reality is that if you haven't identified, a high value export market that is going to sort of give you the added premium for that, we're never going to be able to compete with the commodity protein market that Canada and Australia and other countries have. So we have to find some sort of niche point of differentiation. And if you get the business model right and the market is big enough, then investors will invest in the processing because it will give them a good enough return.
It's a real chicken and egg situation, Alison, and I don't like to be promoting this, but New Zealand Merino have showed an example of brand partners and supplier partnership arrangements. What work is FAR able to do? I know it's a foundation for research, but in terms of bringing that commercial element to even our New Zealand baked goods companies to encourage them to source spray-free wheat, New Zealand grown, etc., more and more, our cereals, our added value plant-based milks, etc.
Everything comes down to a good business plan and having enough investment to be able to drive the opportunity. And I think one of the problems in the arable sector is we've done lots of stop-start type of initiatives over the years because we have come up with a good idea, started the initiative, then lost our way and not had enough money to be able to get over all of the hurdles. So it's actually planning, it's strategic planning, it's getting the market insight right, it's getting the partnership along the supply chain right, it's being clever enough to work out how everybody along the supply chain can clip the ticket. And I just don't think that we've been particularly good at that. And I think what we need to do is we need to be talking to those sectors that have been very successful and looking to see, how we can mirror some of the business models that they've used. So I'm spending a lot of my time now talking to other sectors that have been able to raise awareness and promote their produce, who have been able to open up new export market opportunities, just trying to learn lessons. And it doesn't even have to be in the food production space. It can be in, healthcare or anything like that, because there are business models that work. And if you've got a product that a consumer wants, then you can fit that into that business model. So, we're going to spend a lot more time with NZTE, and we're going to spend a lot of time with business development experts who have been there and done that in other sectors, and we're going to get them to give us sort of advice on the best bet opportunities for the arable sector. So you have to watch this space because it's all going to happen.
Absolutely. I love catching up with Alison Stewart, CEO for FAR, which is the Foundation for Arable Research. Huge amounts of passion and energy herself and her team do to grow value for their members. And of course, I have to give a bit of a shout out. Alison is the host of her own podcast. It is called Cut the Crop. Make sure you search that on wherever you listen to your podcast, or go to cutthecrop.co.nz. I can absolutely guarantee I've learned a lot from that podcast, and you will as well. Now, coming up after the break, we are going to speak with another Alison. This is Alison Eddy. She's the CEO for New Zealand College of Midwives, and I'm deeply concerned about the dire situation that is happening around this country with our rural maternal care. Alison's going to update us on the situation, as well as what her election wish list will be.
This is Sarah's Country.
Every morning, Kiwi farmers wake up to produce high quality food. Yet, every night, some Kiwi families are going to sleep hungry. Meet the Need is a charity founded by farmers, and it's here to change all that. We're about New Zealand farmers feeding New Zealand families by donating a small part of what we grow when we can. You can help us make sure no one in New Zealand goes to sleep hungry again. Visit meettheneed.org and follow us on social.
Welcome to all those who have just joined Sarah's Country Live. And of course, for those who have been watching or listening, a fantastic interview I had with Alison Stewart earlier today within the studio here at Lincoln University. So I apologise, Tony, I didn't get an opportunity to take your question to Alison about what crops and products arable includes. And there's a lot of people that enjoyed that interview. Michael Williams says go arable, and Michael Ross, a great discussion with Alison. Let's hope your wider audience starts to think on the how. Absolutely. I love that word how rather than why. We talk about it too much. I had called at the start. I'd love to know where you're listening or watching from in the comments below. Let us know. Great to see Guy Peacock from Dannyverk is with us, and of course the wonderful Jock Innes. G'day, Jock. Now, of course, we were talking earlier, those who started watching at the start or listening, about board games, your favourite board games. I'd love to know. And, of course, your favourite card games. I used to play a lot with my sister, Kate, when we were kids. And, Joel, do you remember this is the one thing we used to fight over, the game Operation? So I'd be doing something and then she'd knock me and go, ha, 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 ha. That we're basically taking it, and I think that it put me off going into a medical career. That or fainting at the sight of blood, or fainting at the sight of the student loan. Now, on the topic of my sister and going into this next interview that I also recorded earlier today, my sister struggled to find a midwife. I'm laughing not at that point, but she went to the point the very last woman who'd just gone into retirement, felt so sorry for her. And this is in Waihi Beach. And this lady, Joel, I've got to tell you the story. She rides her horse down the beach and rides up to Kate's house to check on her throughout her pregnancy, and ties her horse to the steps. And it's just the most wonderful character. She makes Kate salads with seeds and oils and all sorts of things. And these midwives are just absolutely incredible, the lengths that they go to take great maternal care of our women across this country. So on that note, here is Alison Eddy from the New Zealand College of Midwives.
This is Sarah's Country.
Well, funding for maternity wards has been pulled from many rural areas in the past 3 years and has been very controversial. For many in Southland, they will know about Lumsden's maternity centre being downgraded to a maternal and child hub. There has been funding announcements since in in-demand areas, but I would love to get a bit of an update on the situation for our rural maternal care. So joining us now to discuss, the CEO for New Zealand College of Midwives, Alison Eddy. Welcome to Sarah's Country, Alison.
Hi, thank you for inviting me to talk tonight.
Oh, it's a very important part of our rural communities, and the heartbreaking stories of mothers giving birth on the side of the road, huge distances to these birthing centres. Could you just give us a little bit of an update on how far we've come in the past 3 years?
Well, I mean, I think it's a really important point that you're making. You know, maternity care is an essential service, and, you know, rural communities are challenged to access healthcare at the best of times. And maternity care and having a baby, it's a very important time in a family's life, and it's a time when women generally draw support around them and they want to be, you know, nested within their communities as much as possible. So when that care can be provided as close to home as possible, it gives people the most support and most comfort, really. So I can't report that there's been a great steps forward. I'm actually doing a webinar with Rural Women New Zealand tomorrow afternoon, or Thursday afternoon, and I was just reviewing the information for that, and I had a map of New Zealand that I'd looked at. It was in 2011 that had all of the rural maternity units on it, and there's probably about a dozen that have closed between 2011 and now. So, you know, overall, that's not a very healthy picture for those rural communities, and that's right throughout the south and the north, throughout our country. You know, from the far north right down to Lumsden, the example that you've just given us, the most recent one.
How much has got to do with the capability coming through of people taking a career in midwifery versus the deployment of them across our rural regional areas?
Well, it's not just about the workforce. There are shortages, definitely, and our rural communities can be challenged to recruit and retain rural midwives. And that's not so much about a willingness of women to become midwives, and we actually have quite an effective education model. It's a devolved model. So women from rural communities can often spend, or provincial centres can often spend a large part of their degree program within their own centres and not needing to travel out of them. And that's been a deliberate strategy that was put in place a number of years ago, and recognising, and, you know, health workforce has recognised if you train rural people, they'll generally want to stay and remain and work rurally. And we've been very successful in that in midwifery, but what we haven't been successful at is retaining them, because the work is hard. It's not for the faint-hearted, but it's not well remunerated. The funding model is really not fit for purpose for rural practice, because of the way that the funding's weighted to different elements of care, and also the costs of providing a service in a rural community are huge, and travel is a really big part of that. You know, rural midwives, they need good vehicles, and they just do tens of thousands of kilometres. It's just simply part of the job, and that is part of why it's really difficult to sustain them in the role.
Is there a way that we can collaborate across education and healthcare in rural New Zealand to be able to provide a wraparound service for these shortages that we have, and from primary school teachers to rural GPs and, of course, midwives in a form of capability campaign, but also when they're there on the ground to support them?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a really good point, because what we know is, you know, rural midwives are often deeply embedded within their communities, and that's the best model, because you get longevity of service. They're really committed. They're known. They've got the networks that can actually support them as well. Unfortunately, there's a disconnect between the education sector, which funds the education of midwives, and the health sector, which funds them once they become registered, and that we're really aware that there is a lot of challenge around the financial sustainability of student midwives, who are often older women who have already had a career. So your average age of a graduate is sort of around 30 odd. So they've often got children, you know, farmers' wives, other commitments, desperately wanting to serve their community, but the actual hurdle of getting through the program is really significant for them, and financial barriers are a really big part of that.
Because, I mean, please excuse me, this is an area foreign to me, but is this sort of a way of creating pathways, say, for rural nurses who want to move into a new role, or being able to expand other opportunities to keep them there?
There is, that's a really important point, because we know there's a lot of registered nurses that would be really interested in becoming midwives. It is a degree program. It does require them to meet the full degree program requirements, but they do get a lot of recognition of prior learning from their nursing education and their nursing experience. But what we're seeing recently is a collaboration with the two South Island midwifery schools based in Otago and Christchurch, our Institute of Technology in Christchurch, looking at how they can tailor the way that they manage those entry of the registered nurses. So that's definitely a conversation that's alive and well, because we don't necessarily have the number of applicants into the programs that we would like to make sure that we keep the workforce flowing for those rural communities.
Okay, so we have an election pending. I need to ask about the New Zealand College of Midwives election wish list for whoever elected government is post this October election.
Well, one thing I think has been really interesting hearing this government's pledge to make funding available for for trades or for workforces to reduce the financial barriers, but you listen to the workforces they're promoting, they're all the trades, not the male-dominated workforces. So we would really like the government to turn its mind, or whichever government becomes voted in after the election, to turn their mind to how they could apply that philosophy across the female-dominated workforces, which really struggle, midwifery being one of them, a very, very specialised degree, a really, challenging degree, but as I said, an essential and crucial workforce for the health and wellbeing of our community. So I think that's something that could be, we would really like to see the government consider.
Is there any particular funding decisions that you would immediately want to reverse should you be in the Ministry of Health position, Alison, in the last 3 years? I mean, Lumsden caused so much heartache for a lot of southern communities.
They did. And I think what we saw with that was a bit of a hands-off approach. The government tried to distance itself from the DHB. I think it, became very politicised, but unfortunately so, because again, it becomes a political football that's kicked around. But the ministry wants to keep it, I think, keep it one step removed from the politicians and really placing the responsibility firmly in the hands of the DHBs, who, whichever one you ask, they would all tell you they've not got enough money. And they just don't prioritise things like rural maternity services, unfortunately. So, yes, I think that could be something. And I think the other point is that those rural maternity units not only provide a service to local women, an essential service, they actually provide a backbone to support the rural maternity workforce. So what we've seen now in Lumsden is the midwife who was residing there, who was married to the local GP, committed local woman, has decided to stop providing care because it simply makes her job too hard, being so far from a facility. So that's, the symbiotic nature really of those rural units and the workforce is an absolutely important point that the DHBs don't often understand when they decide to close them.
Heartbreaking, absolutely heartbreaking, Alison, and we just want to thank for all the tireless work yourself and CEO for New Zealand College of Midwives do, and every single midwife around this country do, and particularly in our isolated rural areas. It's incredible work, up at all hours, driving massive distances. You're absolutely our heroes. Thank you so much from all of us. That's Alison Eddy, the CEO for New Zealand College of Midwives. Now, coming up in Sarah's Country, to close the show, we're going to be joined by Caroline Reid. She's a CEO for Overseer. Now, the reason that we're talking to Caroline is a collaboration with Toitū Envirocare. You may remember from previously on Sarah's Country, Becky joined us to talk about how they're working on being able to provide farmers with a carbon calculator. That's right, to be able to ensure that farmers can claim carbon neutrality or even carbon negative. What a great way to be able to market our products into the future. Really looking forward to hearing all about that, as well as how Overseer will play a big part in these freshwater farm environment plans. All that coming up on Sarah's Country.
This is Sarah's Country.
Well, funding for maternity wards has been pulled. Now, the market opportunity is massive, with a Unilever study showing about a third of consumers in the United States, Europe and Asia are choosing produce purchases based on environmental consideration. Research shows sustainable dairy products can earn a price premium of up to 47%. I have been actively saying for years now that it's all well and good saying as farmers, look, we're carbon neutral anyway. We've got these carbon sinks of pasture sequestering carbon from the atmosphere. Our on-farm native and riparian planting is there. But there needs to be some form of calculator, and the science measurement on sequestration is not there yet. So to be able to achieve this, we have a great new carbon certification program brought to you by Toitū Envirocare. And this is going to be able to help New Zealand's thousands of pastoral farmers take advantage of a huge marketing opportunity for sustainable products and position them well in advance of possible government regulation. The tool links to Overseer FM, the farm nutrient management planning software used currently by thousands of New Zealand farmers. And joining us to discuss is CEO for Overseer, Caroline Reid. Good evening, Caroline. Thank you for joining Sarah's Country. This is an exciting leap forward.
It is a really exciting leap forward, Sarah. I mean, we're really pleased to have been able to partner with Toitū to help them provide this carbon certification program. It's going to be really good for farmers to be able to use the information they've already got in Overseer and push that through into a program that's internationally recognised. So we're really pleased about it.
Okay, let's set the scene. The primary sector and the government last year signed this joint action plan known as agri-economic. What is that, and how is it going to bring the industry along with government's intentions?
Well, agri-economic was a really groundbreaking sort of joint agreement between industry and government to really take this challenge together and look at what they needed to put in place to understand emissions coming off farms and what they can do to manage them and reduce them and set policy around them that's going to work for everybody. So the program that we've set up with Toitū isn't actually directly related to that, but that environment moving forward is what's going to be important for farmers in terms of addressing climate change issues.
So how will farmers be able to quantify and verify their performance regarding their carbon emissions on farm and achieve this new certification with Toitū using Overseer FM?
Yes, well, Overseer has been able to help farmers understand their greenhouse gas emissions coming from farm for around 10 years now. And so they didn't really know that because Overseer has been used mostly in freshwater regulations and for nutrient management planning that hasn't looked so closely at greenhouse gas emissions. But the foresight of Ag-Research and the Ministry for Primary Industries, who helped develop the greenhouse gas reporting in Overseer, has meant that it's been there and been around for a long time. And we're able to use that now to help farmers to look at, well, where are their emissions coming from? How can they do things on farm differently to reduce those emissions? And then they can push that information now through to Toitū so that they can look at creating carbon certification. So they can basically identify their farms as being carbon zero.
And so where is this information coming from, this analysis of the greenhouse gas information? And will it develop as we find out more with science? Particularly, I know farmers get so angry around reducing emissions on farm and not the ability to offset from their farm, yet forestry is coming up against them from people off farm that have the ability to offset when they aren't encouraged to reduce.
Yeah, they sure do. They get very frustrated. And because of that, last year, we actually included a tool into Overseer FM that allows farmers to look at how much carbon they're sequestering in their tree blocks. So we're still not talking soil carbon because we've still got the science jury out on that. But what we are talking about is using the information that's available through the MPI lookup tables, which calculates the sequestration potential of the trees that are growing on farm. So you can block that up in Overseer now, and you can understand how much you can sequester on your farm in those tree blocks, or you can look at putting new tree blocks on and what that would do. And then you can balance that against what Overseer is telling you about how much greenhouse gas emissions you're actually emitting from your farm practices and animals.
Can you tell us about the development with plantain now implemented within Overseer FM?
Yeah, sure. We're really excited about getting Overseer to enable farmers to choose plantain as a pasture. We'll be releasing that this week, and that it's been a long time coming. We had a collaboration with the Foragers for Reduced Nitrate Leaching program, a big industry and government program for many years to develop the science. That's come through now, and we're really fortunate to be able to release plantain as a pasture in Overseer this week. That will really help the farmers that have already been using plantain for some time, and it will also help the farmers that want to look at using it in the future.
And of course, for those who are not aware with that research, it is plantain has been found to reduce nitrate leaching. And of course, the question on that though, as we develop more knowledge around these particular science projects and what they can do, can we speed up how these can get into Overseer faster from your learnings this time round?
Yeah, so there's a big balance we have to make there. I hope we can speed it up, but we want to make sure it's evidence-based. So we don't want to be putting things into the model that we haven't got strong evidence for, because then we'll be giving people the wrong idea and we might have to change it later. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that we can collect enough data to allow farmers to have some confidence that what they'll be modelling will be a good estimate for their management practices on farm.
Okay, we have to turn now to the controversial freshwater farm environment plans under the new national environmental standards, which, let's be honest, regional councils are tearing their hair out right now, Carolyn, and they're going to be relying heavily on Overseer.
Yes, they sure are. And look, they've been relying on Overseer for some time, and we've been really actively working with them to try and help them to be able to use Overseer in a way that's going to benefit everyone in New Zealand and our waterways. So, Overseer is a tool that enables people to understand where on their farm leaching might be occurring and what they can do about it. And so it's by bringing that information into a farm plan and looking at the farm plan as a whole that will be able to support farmers to make steps forward in making the changes that need to be made to protect the waterways.
Yeah, but very much these new standards are input-based versus output, which Overseer is the tool that farmers use. And low slope, for instance, in terms of gradient, a desktop exercise from Wellington doesn't sort of help with Overseer, does it? And grazing management practices, etc., pugging depth.
Yes. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to advocate for this output-based system. And working with regional councils who don't want to be telling farmers how to farm, they want to be asking farmers to achieve a goal. And so we're working with them to do that so that we can avoid further input controls being brought into the picture. And in order to do that, we need to make sure that farmers are understanding how Overseer can help them and understanding how they can get benefit out of it and getting on board and really looking at how output controls could actually support them rather than seeing more input controls come in.
Okay, Caroline, I have to ask you, He Waka Eke Noa sounds fantastic in principle of collaboration between the primary sector and government, but was your concerns heard with Minister David Parker's final decision around these freshwater standards?
Look, I don't think we're there finally with any of the policy yet, and I think there's still a long way to go for everyone to understand how much we can use Overseer for the benefit of agriculture in New Zealand.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us, CEO for Overseer, Caroline Reid, and of course the exciting news, the collaboration with Toitū Envirocare. Farmers will now be able to get carbon certification and of course utilise that going forward into the future as a marketing benefit. I am very excited about this news and congratulations to those involved. That is all we've got time for tonight on Serious Country. If you're loving listening along and you've missed any of the shows, feel free to subscribe to Sarah's Country wherever you listen to your podcasts. And the full in-depth written articles are available on farmersweekly.co.nz. This program wouldn't be made possible without the in-depth journalism of the most experienced agri-journalists in this country, and of course analysts as well. Sarah Perriam sarah@perriammedia.com is my email address, and I love hearing from you. So please send me an email at any time with suggestions on topics or guests that you'd like to have on the show. We will be back tomorrow night, and as a little bit of a sneak peek, I'm going to let you know we have David and George Giddings on tomorrow from Meadowsley with their online livestock trading platform. Very exciting that they got up and running for their own stud, but is now being used around the world. They'll join us, as well as Dean Carson will continue on around the frustrations that are mounting about the new grazing rules, particularly in Southland. And I'm really excited about being joined by the team from Agri-C about an animal supplement that reduces nitrate leaching that has recently taken out an award. We'll be back tomorrow night live from 7 o'clock. And in the meantime, good night and go well.
This is Sarah's Country.